This is Invertebrate Estuary, a fully self-sufficient ecosystem home to populations of 11 unique species. I built it in the pursuit of knowledge and to provide a natural and comfortable home to a myriad of select animals which I meticulously researched to make sure each was a perfect fit for this environment. I've been building and keeping vivariums for over 3.5 years, and now that I'm confident in my abilities, I'd like to take you on a relaxing journey through one of my gardens. Not to encourage you to build your own, but to encourage you to appreciate these often overlooked animals. Today, I'll introduce you to all of my invertebrates, and we'll introduce a new predator species, the first vertebrate in Invertebrate Estuary. In the murky, amber waters of Invertebrate Estuary, Colombian red Ramshorn snails fed on the decaying ends of a monstera vine cutting. These snails are often considered pests rather than pets, but I think their spiral shells and bright orange coloration is incredibly beautiful. I love to find their egg sacs around the tank, as it means they're healthy, reproducing, and that more snails are on the way. Another thing I love about them is their size. Sometimes it makes me imagine them as the equivalent to buffalo on their food web. This ecosystem was like a prehistoric forest, inhabited by diverse, unusual, and often quite large animals. But the balance was being challenged by another species, bladder snails. These are another beautiful animal. They're quick and have a unique shape and color. They also have the fascinating ability to change their buoyancy with their swim bladder, floating peacefully up and down and sliding along the surface of the water upside down. But as cool as these snails are, in this tank, they're invasive. They quickly outcompete the ramshorns, whose sanctuary this is meant to be. Don't worry though, as I delicately remove these 3 from the estuary, they too have a place. I released them and smiled as they joined hundreds more of their kind and were now free to prosper and reproduce without threatening the ramshorns. But their story is for another video. Back in Invertebrate Estuary, feeding alongside the Ramshorn snails were ghost shrimp. Named for their translucent bodies, 15 adults were released into this tank, and for the first 3 days, I only saw 2. Today, I see them regularly swimming about and exploring their sanctuary. These animals typically pick algae off of the walls with their dexterous legs and arms, but today I spotted a new behavior. Many animals living in this tank gain their energy from feeding off of detritus and algae, but for many others, they must get their energy from hunting prey. This ghost shrimp tore apart and devoured this helpless blackworm. I felt sad for the blackworm and hoped it had reproduced before it died. But I knew that in nature, we cannot pick sides. All animals must survive, and today, our ghost shrimp needed protein from our blackworm. But I wasn't worried about the blackworms being eaten. If I was, there wouldn't be blackworm predators in this tank. These blackworms coat the floor of the tank and reproduce by splitting one worm into 2. Blackworms are detrivores, eating decaying plant matter and microorganisms. Both were abundant food sources in Invertebrate Estuary. Planaria, Rhabdicola, and copepods were common sights crawling along the walls of this tank, and all of my terrestrial plants were constantly shedding leaves. Oh, there was our new predator, feeding on blackworms as well. We'll get to her in a moment. I noticed a Malaysian trumpet snail on the wall. If you're paying close attention, you may have already seen a few of these. In one of my other vivariums, these sometimes appear in the hundreds, and at other times, you might think there were none at all. This is because Malaysian trumpet snails often burrow into the sand, completely disappearing for hours at a time. This makes them great for planted aquariums, because when they burrow, they pull waste from above underground. This provides nourishment to the plant's roots and keeps the sand looking clean. Look at those long conical shells. They're beautiful, aren't they? And if you look really close, you might notice their trunk-like mouth. See how the mouth opens and another part comes down, scraping the algae off of the walls? That's the radula. It's a single structure, kind of like a tongue, covered in tiny teeth. But it's not the only specialized feeding apparatus in this tank. If you weren't experienced with snails, you might mistake this for a trumpet snail. This, however, would be a potentially deadly mistake. if you were a snail. Because if the Colombian red ramshorns were the water buffaloes, then the assassin snails were the tigers. They're beautiful, with their yellow and black stripes, but deadly, with a bizarre weapon to help them catch prey. The siphon, in other snails, is a breathing and feeding apparatus, usually used like a snorkel to breathe air from the surface. But on the assassin snail, it's like a vacuum, used to suck other snails out of their shells. There are currently only 2 assassin snails in Invertebrate Estuary, as I've so far failed to breed them. If anyone has any advice, please leave it in the comments below, because I'd love a sustained population. But this isn't the predator that we saw darting around earlier in the video. My newest predators are the first vertebrates in Invertebrate Estuary. This is a female African dwarf frog, which my partner named Kermit. I currently have 2 females, though I'm looking for a male. You can tell them apart by their shape. One has a slender hourglass figure, while the other is nice and plump, which I'm very happy to see. Perhaps she's even pregnant, as she was kept with males before. Any experts care to chime in? As amphibians, they breathe air and must surface to take a breath every few minutes. They're a bit shy still, but over the last few days, they have started to show less and less fear while I'm in the room. These little amphibians are the apex in this tank, but they're far from intimidating. They have very poor eyesight and might not even know I'm here when I'm moving slowly enough. But the feeling is mutual. I initially wasn't a huge fan of the blonde palette, as it made them a bit hard to sex. But look how well they blend in when they're laying their flat bodies on the sand. They look perfectly suited for Invertebrate Estuary in my opinion. And they are. The warm, shallow water, teeming with blackworms and baby shrimp, and with tons of hiding spots, is their ideal habitat. As I sat before the tank and observed the animals within, this little one observed me as well. When she stood like this, I couldn't help but see her as just a tiny person. I kept hoping she would find this half of a coconut shell that I left just for her, and after about 20 minutes, she did. I was so happy to see her feeling comfortable and enjoying her new domain. She came up for air and went back in a few times before swimming back into the depths. See you later, Kermit. But Invertebrate Estuary wasn't in its final form. It was only halfway full, and I hadn't cleaned the exposed glass yet. I had initially planned on an exposed land portion with branches and bamboo, hoping that someday I might add crabs. But I didn't feel comfortable adding any more frogs before there was a bit more water. And don't worry, I have a plan for keeping crabs in the future. But for now, this tank would be expanding upwards. I left a few inches at the top so that the branches would have time to waterlog before I finished the job. African dwarf frogs need relatively shallow water, but so long as it wasn't deeper than 2 feet and they had access to air, my frogs would be perfectly happy. Now that this tank has been updated, let's change out these outdated animal tags. This will be a great opportunity to recap the species we've discussed. Colombian red ramshorn, Malaysian trumpet snail, assassin snail, ghost shrimp, drainfly, blackworms, planaria, rhabdicola, copepod, and African dwarf frogs. So now, all this tank needed was the ability for its predators to breed. Next episode, I plan on getting a male African dwarf frog, and with your help, hopefully, I can start breeding my assassin snails. If you have any other ideas for animals that could sustainably live in these tanks, please tell me. I usually decide on new animals based on 4 questions. The first is, will the new species' environmental and dietary needs be met? The second is, will the animal be able to maintain a stable and large population? The third is, will the animal be able to reproduce? And the fourth is, will the animal be happy? Please consider these questions before submitting a suggestion. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this and would like to see more of my videos, please leave a like and maybe even subscribe. You can also see my other work, which currently includes my art, and will soon include more of these videos. Good night, Invertebrate Estuary.